Welcome back, everyone, to Podcasting for Business. This is episode 14. I mean, these episodes are flying by. Ronsley, I wasn't here last week. Did everything go okay?
Well, I decided that while James was away, I was going to play. So I invited these two amazing women, and it was great. I was sandwiched. No, I wasn't sandwiched in between because I was in the. But it was a great show. We did not miss you, unfortunately. But your face was everywhere. Your face was everywhere, and we enjoyed ourselves. And Sandy actually likes it better because you're more prepared and I'm not. So that's the feedback from the show.
I would expect nothing less than good fun, especially with you and Sandy involved. This is your first time joining us at Podcasting for Business. We show you how to get more listeners, more clients, and more credibility, all from using your podcast. If you're a business owner with a podcast and you have a story of how it's helped or hindered your business growth, we'd love to hear from you and feature you on our show. You can send Ronsley and I, or Ronsley or I, a DM, and we can get you on the show. It'll be amazing to hear about the journey that you have been on. And today, what we're going to cover, we have a very special guest, Omar Zenhom, who's done some incredible things. I'll give the full bio of him shortly. The big mistake that we will go through is tracking the wrong metric or not tracking any metrics at all. And the tactic that Ronsley is going to go through are the 7 questions to ask yourself before you start a podcast. If you would like the copy of our full list of the 10 biggest mistakes that business owners make with the podcast, as well as action steps on how to fix them, go to mistakes.wearepodcast.com or comment mistakes below, and you'll be able to get a free download of that PDF. Ronsley and I are so excited to interview Omar, who has been an integral part of We Are Podcast for a long, long time. Omar is the co-founder and CEO of Webinar Ninja. Founded in 2014, more than 1 million people have attended a webinar on Webinar Ninja, and it was named one of the fastest growing software as a service companies in the world. Omar is also host of the $100 MBA show, which has got more than 2,000 episodes and more than 200 million downloads. I have a pen here. I'm going to be very, very busy taking notes from Omar today. I'm sure Ronsley is too. Omar, without further ado, we want to feel your energy. Thanks for joining us today.
It's great to be here, guys.
Thanks, man. It's the first thing that I want to say is thank you for being part of We Are Podcast since 2016. It feels like Nicole and you have just always supported us, and I am extremely grateful, and Rochelle and James as well. Like, it's so cool to have you part of We Are Podcast 2022. So thanks for being here.
You guys are easy to support. I mean, it's a great conference, great people, always have a good time. So I'm excited for November.
Yeah.
Omar, it seems like now with 200 million downloads, more than 2,000 episodes, a lot of people might see that and be like, wow, it's all right for him. He's had this established audience. What were some of the things you did at the very start to gain traction and start to build that audience to begin with?
I first want to say that we all start at zero. We can all use that excuse. I could have used that excuse. I was launching my podcast when Serial was being launched and Startup, and Tim Ferriss, who has like 5 New York Times bestsellers. I was competing with long-established podcasts like Jordan Harbinger as a podcaster, Smart Passive Income, Pat Flynn, Entrepreneurs on Fire. Like, I'm entering a world of, legends, and we all start at zero at some point. So I like to remind myself and everybody else that if you're starting a podcast, it just takes one listener at a time, and that's kind of the approach I had when I first got started. And the $100 MBA show, or my podcast, is not my first podcast. My podcast, I had a podcast before that totally failed, and I learned a lot of lessons through that failure, and didn't do well at all. But when we decided to build and create the $100 MBA show, we really wanted to focus on what we do best. There's plenty of things I do horribly. I don't do well, but I focus on where I can add the most value, and that's my ability to teach. I actually am a trained school teacher. I taught at the high school and university level. I taught English for 13 years. So I'm actually someone on the internet that was trained to teach. So I just focused on that and taught business lessons every single day on the podcast. and just focused on what I felt I can do to differentiate myself from all the amazing competition I was joining.
So, I mean, you mentioned something interesting there about your gift or your talent as a teacher. How did you know that there was an audience for that talent? Like, how did you figure that out? Like, how did you break that down and decide to kind of, especially after having a failed podcast and kind of going, okay, this is not working. How do you know, okay, my talent is teaching. Does anyone even care? Because probably that's people asking that question a lot.
A couple of things. One, I was just brutally honest with myself when I launched the $100 MBA show. I looked at all the competition that I mentioned. I looked at the top business podcasts on Apple, and I asked myself, how am I going to compete with these people that are so well established, that are really famous, that have great shows, that have great followings? How am I going to add unique value? And the honest answer that got back to me after, really thinking about it deeply, and also feeling like maybe I don't have something that can compete, was, well, actually, where is the best value? What can I add to the world that I have that is the most valuable gift I have? And when I say gift, it's not like I was born with this. I had to work on being a good teacher. And for me, I was like, well, actually, I have a lot of experience teaching. I taught, what I used to call 5 matinees a day. I used to teach 5 classes every single day, 5 days a week. I know how to teach. I know how to put a lesson together. I know how to take the complex and simplify it, because my job relied on it. I know how to, bring, information and try to, put it together in a short format and be able to give you a lot in a little bit of time. So I decided just to focus on my strengths. Like, what is the one thing I can actually compete on? And I felt like I probably am a better teacher than all these people that I mentioned. With all due respect, they were amazing, people that have done great things in the podcasting world and beyond. But I probably can teach the pants off all of these guys, because that's what I really specialized in my career. Too many people, they get into podcasting, they get into entrepreneurship, they neglect their past. They say, I'm not an engineer anymore, I'm a life coach. Well, there's tons of engineers that need help in different areas that you can actually help them with, because you have that experience. They can relate to you. They understand that you understand their world. So I'm a big believer in that. If you're moving careers or changing your life, you don't have to throw away all the experience you had. Take it, use it to your advantage.
So it sounds like the incumbent players, the ones that you just mentioned there, those amazing podcasters, you didn't necessarily view them as competition. You used their benchmarks as something that you could aspire towards while focusing on your strengths. So that way you were able to create something unique that meant that you could carve your own path. I mean, there's more than 7 billion people on the planet. So with an abundance mindset, there are so many people out there that you can find a home for the products and services and the value that you're providing the market.
Yeah, James, I do want to say though, yes, they are providing great value, and I didn't see them as competition, so to speak. But I am competing for the listener's time. Your listeners have a finite amount of time to listen to podcasts, right? Why are they going to choose me? And I had to be real about that. I had to say, I got to be able to provide something that makes them say, you know what, this is a good use of my time when I'm commuting, when I'm at the gym, when I'm doing something. And we just have to face the facts sometimes, like, what am I going to do to grab this listener and make sure that they come back for more and say, this is worth my time? And for me, it was like, I felt like business podcasts out there, there are great discussion podcasts. There's great backstory podcasts. There's great, kind of documentary style storytelling podcasts. But for me, I wanted to be able to provide great business advice and strategies in a short period of time, with really very little fluff, so that somebody can consume it and get out and move on to maybe another podcast, or maybe to the switch to music or something like that. But the point here is that, like, you got to be a little bit honest with yourself and face the reality that you are competing for the attention of your audience. You're going to find your audience, you're going to find your following, they're going to love you, but don't take them for granted. You have to actually earn their trust and their listenership.
So, I mean, you mentioned something that's obviously the basis of any engaging content, whether it's video, audio, text, it doesn't matter, right? But I think for a business owner coming into podcasting, probably the biggest change that we go through is understanding that there's a difference between clients, which we consider to be audience, and audience, which is a new audience, or the audience that we're kind of having this content. And that's maybe my perception, but I wonder whether you could speak a little to that big shift, I suppose, as a business owner, having a podcast and having these different types of audiences to kind of worry about, cater to, because a client would probably need way different information to someone who's just heard about you.
Yeah, I think the best way to look at this is just brand awareness. Think about any purchase you've made, big or small. Think about the last car you bought. There's probably a good chance that you had several touch points with this car manufacturer before you actually signed on the dotted line and bought that car. You probably saw a billboard, you probably saw an ad on the TV, maybe you saw a YouTube review about it, maybe you read an article, maybe there's going to be a whole bunch of things that lead to that point where you're just like, you know what, I'm going to buy the Tesla, or I'm going to buy, the new Mercedes, blah, blah, blah. The point here is that your podcast becomes your media source. It becomes a way for you to build trust, build awareness, allow people to see that, oh, okay, this person actually knows what they're talking about. They can help me out. They're not at the point yet to think about actually exchanging money and for your services. But right now you're in an audition stage where they're exchanging their time in exchange for value. So if they get the value, they're going to say to themselves subconsciously that, hey, I spend my time listening to this podcast. I get great value. Every time I listen to this podcast, I feel like more motivated, more inspired. I actually have some things to do after the podcast to kind of work on myself or work on my business. And then psychologically, they're going to think, hey, I've trusted with my time. There's a good chance if I give them my money, I can trust them to deliver. So obviously the show, the podcast will help them to some degree, but most people engage in a service or buy something because, one, they want to do it faster. They want to implement it with far greater ease. They want accountability. They want to be able to, get to the finish line in a more efficient way. So most people that are trying to actually implement and try to take things on are going to then transition from a listener or an audience member to a actual client or customer.
This is so huge, Omar. And before I ask you the next question, we've actually got Rose who's dropped a comment asking about the We Are podcast event in November. It's going to be in Brisbane, Australia, and it's going to be in person. We're all very, very excited for that. There's going to be a lot of hugs. There's going to be a lot of fun. That will be an incredible 2 days. So make sure you're ready for that. We'll have a lot more information on that coming up very soon. Omar, you have shared so much about the value of podcasting and so many incredible gems here about building trust and gaining exposure and leveraging your skills and all of those different types of things. If a podcast is not your avenue to be able to do that, like if someone's watching this show or listening to this show and they say, look, I just feel like podcasting is not the right avenue for me. Is there anything else that even competes in terms of being able to get the benefits in terms of gaining that exposure and building trust with people who could potentially be a good client for you down the track?
I'm going to challenge that a little bit. Not you, James, but just the concept. You can believe in a strategy. You could say, hey, podcasting is great, and I think it would work for a business, right? And it can work for my business. Maybe you feel like you can't do it because maybe you're not somebody who feels like you want to be on the mic, but it doesn't mean your company can't produce a podcast. People, you outsource marketing, you outsource engineers, you outsource customer service, outsource somebody to create a podcast for you. You can find somebody who would be a great host that could produce an episode a week and know your topip and know your area of knowledge or what your business is about. Or you can get somebody to copyright something and write something for them so that they could stick to an outline or a script. This definitely can happen. By the way, companies do this all the time. Look at if you go to iTunes or you go to Spotify or go to anywhere that hosts podcasts, you'll see companies like eBay and Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs and things like that. You think the head of Goldman Sachs is doing the podcast? No, they hire somebody to do it. So you could do the same thing, and you could do it on a project basis. You could just say, hey, let's do a deal for 12 episodes and see how it goes. Do a season, and So I want to challenge that a little bit, because you may not feel like doing it, but you can do it. It doesn't mean that that's a bad idea for your company. You got to kind of put on your investor or CEO hat a little bit sometimes. I feel like podcasting in a way is one of the best ways to build trust long term. It's a long term play. Anybody who asks me, should I start a podcast, I say, yeah, you should, but commit to a year. Commit to a year of producing a podcast, because it does take some time for you to get some traction and build that relationship. But it's like an old friendship. People that meet me in person, they feel like they've known me because they've been listening to my voice in their ears day after day. So it definitely is a deep, deep connection, a lot deeper than running like Facebook ads or Instagram or running any kind of paid advertising, because it's kind of ephemeral and it kind of goes away, and you don't really have that time to kind of build that relationship every single episode. So I really believe that even if I stopped podcasting today, the benefits of those 2,000 episodes I produced over the years will continue to reap its fruit for years to come, just because of all the trust I've built over the years. So I really believe podcasting is one of those things that's like one of the best long-term investments. It's like, investing in, the stock market or something over a long period of time. Like, you're just going to win, right? Even if you have a small audience, over time, you'll build that trust. People might say the same thing about YouTube. People might say the same thing about, social media. I personally believe that I'm a big fan of YouTube. I love YouTube as a consumer. YouTube is one of my favorite channels to consume, but it's really busy, and it's very, very competitive, because there's so much distraction. So for example, if I choose to listen to your podcast, I'm in that podcast now. I'm listening to that podcast. My phone's away. I'm driving, whatever. I'm kind of committed. I'm listening to this thing, and I'm going to give it a fair shake. YouTube, it's like there's so many options. There's things on the right, there's things on the left, there's comments, there's all this different things telling you to click somewhere else. So it's very, if you think YouTube is easier, I'm going to challenge you and say no, it's actually harder, because it's highly, highly competitive. And there's the statistics out there, how many millions of hours are out there.
Yeah, I just want to touch on that point that you said there, Omar. If you're not feeling comfortable about being the host and having the show yourself, you have a business. The objective is to build trust with a bunch of people that you care about. Outsource the tasks to get it done. Like in book publishing, so many of the books that you see out there that are monster global hits, the person didn't write a single word, and they've done a really good job of making sure they've extracted the knowledge from their brain and built the team around them to be able to get the job done, because it's the tasks that are completed that enable you to build trust and be able to grow your audience from there.
Full transparency, James, I have an audio course that's had gotten a lot of success on Himalaya Learning. It's an audio course called Start Your First Online Business. The way I created this course is I actually went on walks every day. I rambled into my phone for like 30 to 40 minutes, maybe an hour sometimes, depending on the topic. And I did that 10 times. And I sent that to Connor, who's our copywriter and just content creator genius. And he took all my ramblings and all my, tangents and made it into a nice little tight script for me. And then I just read the script on a mic, and there was my audio course. And, it's a bestseller. It's like, I'm not joking here. It was that simple, but some people just feel like they can't take these shortcuts. And I want to say it's not a shortcut. You're just getting somebody to help you organize your thoughts. And at the end of the day, it's your ideas, it's your content. They're just being cleaned up, right? And they're being, sanded and looking polished a little bit so that you can go ahead and then record it.
So obviously now in 2022, having content as part of your business is just like having a website, I don't know, 10 years ago. And I feel like people are sort of coming into that, and especially for a business owner who is not content creator type person, right? They're a business owner, they know how to do business, or whatever their specialty is, but content is so hard to get engagement, is what we're saying right now, right? It's hard to, like, whether it's a podcast or whatever. How would you sort of advise someone, myself as well, like, if I'm thinking about this, like, how would you ask us to re-look maybe at our content strategy when we're putting out, because it's such a huge part of everyone's business, and obviously you have a lot of experience, because when you say I went for a walk and rambled, someone listening to that, myself included, would be like, I don't even know where to begin with that. But you might have a strategy for what you were saying, or maybe you broke that down, or you must have a way to kind of like had some strategy behind it. So when it comes to content, what are we missing as business owners when we put out stuff, and how can we create better content, I suppose, going forward?
This is a great question, Ronsley, and I'm gonna agree with you totally. Like, I'll be honest with you. When I first started Webinar Ninja back in 2014, I just had to have a really strong blog. I blogged myself. If you just focused on one medium and one channel, you'd be all right. You'd get organic traffic. You'd be okay. And it was still early days in the internet, and there was not all these options and different places for people to go to get information. Now, because of all the the plethora of social media channels, YouTube, private kind of courses like Masterclass, and all the things that are available to everybody to gain information. And remember, books as well. Books, remember that. There's so much places you need to be, right? So one thing I want to mention is I've learned along the way that I can't do it all on my own. I can't just be the content person and the face of the company and run the business and do the finances and make sure everybody gets paid on time. And I can't do it all. I have to start to realize that maybe there's other people that can help me, even if I believe they're not as good as me at whatever content, or whatever idea or knowledge. I actually learned this from Carl Taylor, mutual friend of ours, where it's like, just accept the fact that if you're going to outsource it, it might be 80% of what you would do, but 80% times 5, 10 people is going to produce better results than you doing it 100%. So I'm a big believer in trying to expand and try to get help, and even on a project basis, whether it's internally in your business or externally. But to answer your question about like, what do I think about when I ramble and when I come up with the content so that somebody can help me out, like Connor, I literally just think about, like, for example, when I was doing those lessons for that course, let's say, for example, the first chapter was about choosing a business idea. I would just think about, what if a close friend of mine, a family member, asked me, Omar, I'm struggling with coming up with a business idea. What do I do? And I was actually on my phone, and I just pretended I was talking to them on the phone. Hey, this is what I advise you to do. Don't worry about these things. Worry about this thing. This is really what's going to matter. This is what's going to care about. And I just basically gave advice to a mythical person, or I actually made up and pretended, hey, what if my sister asked me this question? What would I say to her? So that's probably the best advice I come with. Maybe that's kind of cheesy or weird, but that's what I did.
Omar's Ramblings. I think there's going to be a lot of people searching that for Google. It's going to be one of the top searches in the next 24 hours.
Hashtag Omar's Ramblings.
I want to move now into our big mistake. So this one for today is mistake number 10 from our 10 mistakes, and it's tracking the wrong metrics or not tracking any metrics at all. Ronsley, what are and Omar, we'd love to get your thoughts on this. Before that, Ronsley, what do you believe are the 7, I know that you have this already lined up, ready to go, because we spoke about it on the last show, but what are the 7 metrics that you believe every business owner should track with their podcast?
Well, first of all, I think maybe getting an idea of what other metrics are being tracked, because there's so many different metrics that can be tracked. And I think as a business owner, obviously tracking money in the bank is super important. But what I'm talking about here in terms of metrics are marketing metrics that need to be tracked. So in the last show, we covered the marketing. We covered the one tool sheet, and I'll go through this in our tactic, but we covered the 7 metrics that matter most for a business podcaster. This is purely marketing metrics, right? So there are 7. The first one that's most important is the number of episodes that you've published as a podcaster. Now, putting out the episodes is a huge rep in itself. It is like the basics of getting better at your craft. So the number of episodes you put out is the number one metric that you got to take care of. The second is the episodes completed that are scheduled and waiting to be published. For me, it's 5. I don't have to do much until the middle of July. I don't have to do anything actually because it's all scheduled and in the buffer waiting to go. Recordings is the next one. How many recordings do you have? For me, until the end of the year, I have all my recordings required for my podcast. So I have a big number of them in the bank. Then the total number of listens that you have for your podcast. What's the total number of downloads? Followed by what is the number of what's the average number of listens per episode? And then as a business owner, the number of leads that are coming in from your podcast. So are people downloading your lead magnet? Are you getting their contact details, which is really important because that's the way you have a conversation, followed by the number of partnerships that you create from your podcast. So that's what we recommend our clients track at the bare minimum, these 7 metrics. But I'm keen to hear what you all think about the metrics that need to be tracked. And it could be something entirely different from what I mentioned.
Omar just tracks
like
his
those
podcast
metrics.
in hundreds of millions of downloads.
Yeah, I love those metrics, and just to be fair to everybody, these are great metrics, especially when you're starting out. You're gonna have to change your metrics as you start growing because what matters more and most will change for you. But these are awesome to start with, and I love the sheet; it's incredible. I wish I had it when I was starting out. The one thing I would just maybe add or think about for those who are running podcasts, one of the ways that can help your podcast grow is not to rely only on your own marketing, but how can I create some sort of exponential marketing? How can what are those things that really drive listenership? And for us, we found that when people share the podcast with other people, whether they share it on social, they share it with their friends, that really matters. So if you can track how many people have mentioned your podcast on social that week, were you written up on any publications? Because we saw some major growth when we started seeing us, listed on a publication, even if it was a small blog or a blogger that was saying, hey guys, I'm listening to this podcast this week, check it out, in their newsletter. So just mentions outside of your own influence really helps because you're getting social proof other people think your show is worth sharing. And then the other thing is that they're amplifying your message to their audience.
Yeah, and so much of the things that you've spoken about, Omar, in fact, one of the big themes from the things that we've gone through today is that you have to just start a podcast. You've got to get those reps in. These things are going to adjust and evolve over time. It's almost too much to try and be thinking so far ahead if you haven't even started the podcast. So just focusing on having a consistent podcast. Ronsley mentioned the 2 first metrics there, number of episodes recorded, number of episodes scheduled. Most people can't even get to 8 episodes with the podcast, which is crazy. Obviously, they don't have the right plan and the right focus, and they haven't got that commitment of at least 1 year, as you mentioned before.
What I like to just advise people, and I share this advice as a visual, is kind of see your podcasting journey like karate classes. For me, the black belt in podcasting is my friend and mutual friend Jordan Harbinger. The guy is incredible. He's just totally an amazing podcaster. His show is top 10 in the world. It's incredible, right? I'm not there yet, in my journey. And he's put in all these reps. I mean, the guy launched a podcast before the iPhone. Before we actually listened to podcasts. So the guy's a sensei, right? The guy's Master Splinter. He's a black belt, right? So for me, I feel like you have to see yourself when you're first starting out. You're a white belt. You need to show up to class. You need to do the push-ups. You need to clean the mats. You need to go around and do this, whatever, the jogging around in circles, and it's going to suck in the beginning. You're going to hate it. And then you're finally going to get a stripe on your belt, which is maybe, 10 episodes. The point is that you're not going to just jump to black belt. It's going to take you a while. You're going to go through the belt system. You're going to exert a lot of effort. You're going to have doubts. You're not going to enjoy it. It's going to be a grind. But eventually you're going to start getting some results. You're going to move to yellow and then whatever the next color is and all that kind of stuff.
Sorry, James. I was going to say I had this vision of Master Splinter Jordan Harbinger speaking Mandarin because you remember the time that he was learning Mandarin I think twice a week and stuff. So he's obviously fluent. So, but I wanted to ask you this question because you mentioned you sort of mentioned it in passing. But have you ever kind of gone through pod fade, in the sense that, have you ever thought through the $100 MBA journey, because so many downloads, so many episodes, was there ever a time when you kind of went, whew, it's a lot, I feel like I can't sustain, either energy wise, or I don't know, maybe it's not, maybe it was a straight run through, but was there ever a point where you witnessed that kind of pod fade, which seems to be everywhere these days?
Maybe a version of it, and I would say it was more of a feeling of guilt, because I run a software company, Webinar Ninja, and I felt like, for me, I have to split my time a bit with focusing on the podcast, not only the production of the podcast. I have a great team around me to produce it, but coming up with the concepts and the outlining and the recording, and then marketing it and getting on shows and being part of things like this in the podcasting space, and all that takes time. And I often think, if I didn't do that, would my SaaS company be somewhere else? I'm happy with the results that we've had with our SaaS company, but at the same time, I only have 24 hours in the day. Having said that, I always go back to the fact that I probably would have nothing without the podcast. If I'm being totally honest, I would not be invited to conferences. I would not be invited to speak on stages, because the podcast gave me a voice. It gave me a chance to help my community, to understand my audience, to build a solution like Webinar Ninja for them, understand what they need. So I owe a lot to the podcast, so I'm not going to turn my back on it. So I always remind myself of why I started the show, if I ever have those feelings, and what benefit it does. And if I need a pick me up, I go and read my reviews. I go and remember that, hey, this is actually helping people. Let me just keep going and enjoy the journey. By the way, one of the best pieces of advice I can give is go and hang out with your parents. Go hang out with your grandparents. Okay, these people are going to tell you, these are the best years of your life. Do your best work. You're going to regret that you didn't go for it, that you didn't actually do what you love and continue to give your best to the world. This is the time to shine. This is the time to give it all.
Yeah, it's so true, Omar. We'll move into Ronsley's tactic for this episode shortly. Before that, I just wanted to mention something that you shared before, Omar. You mentioned Jordan Harbinger had his podcast out before the first iPhone was even released. So if you think it is hard right now to grow an audience using a podcast, imagine how hard it was back then when no one even listened to podcasts. This is your opportunity. Ronsley, the big tactic for today, what do you got for us?
Yeah, well, I was going to cover that. It's from the same sheet that we call it the one tool sheet that we give our clients, but it's the strategy sheet where we start off asking them the 7 questions, and it's kind of 20 minutes, right? So if you want a copy of this sheet, just mention that in the comments, and we'll get a team member to be in touch. But I'm going to go through the 7 questions, and it's quite simple and straightforward, right? So it's very simple in terms of what you can put in there, but put 20 minutes on the clock and ask yourselves these 7 questions. The first one, why? Why a podcast? Why now? And most importantly, how does it benefit my business? And I think that last question is one that we might not ask ourselves. And now this kind of questions, if you've not asked them before, it's really good to redo them, even if you have a podcast right now. And it's really good to redo this every 6 months so that you can get a feel for where your strategy's at. The second one, who is it for, and who do they already listen to? Because that will give you an idea of where you can go and create partnerships with and create marketing for. Number 3, what would keep them engaged, entertained, and excited? So you have, and we can break them down. I'm not going to go into the details. Number 4, how am I going to give them what they want? So how am I going to deliver this engagement, this entertainment, this excitement that I've written up here? How am I going to make that happen in my show? That's number 4. Number 5, when am I going to record and when am I going to release? Because if you separate them, you can actually get all your recordings done maybe at the start of the year and just release them over time. So it depends on how you want to do that. So number 5. Number 6 is, where is my audience already? which will give you your first marketing steps, which is important. And number 7, which type of podcast am I going to create? So it's going to be a monologue, interview style, training or teaching concepts like Omar mentioned. Is it going to be repurposed audio from live content? Is it an audio documentary style? Is it live one-on-one coaching? What kind of podcast are you going to create? And when you answer these 7 questions, it's much easier for you to start a podcast than if you go in blind from the kind of podcast that you listen to a bunch of podcasts and then your imagination only allows you to create a mixture of the kind of podcast you listen to. Gentlemen, thoughts?
I think this is
Well,
great.
I
love the fact that you guys systematized everything.
It's great. I was going to
I don't wanna
say,
jump
I
on
think
your
it's also, I think it's also very good marriage advice as well. What would keep them engaged, entertained, and excited? So that's what we try and do. We try and give business advice, relationship advice, all on the one go.
That's funny.
I also think that, I just hearing you go through that and seeing the sheet and just seeing the dedication that you're putting to, I think that just the fact that people are tracking these things, knowing that they are making these decisions about what their podcast is going to be all about, putting the effort, there's something about writing things down, tracking things that make it real, that make you feel like I'm committing to this, right? Versus it all in your head or just some doodly notes. I think that by you giving people these worksheets and getting them to kind of take action, this is why when I run webinars, I always tell people, I'm going to do all this stuff. I'm going to teach all this stuff for you in today's webinar. Your job is to take notes and participate and answer questions. Because at the end of the day, if they don't actually implement or write things down or do things, they're not really committing to taking action and applying what they're learning from you. So I love the fact that you're encouraging people by just giving them a template.
Yeah, I mean, it's about making it as simple as possible. So when we decided, like, okay, how can we shortcut to your point, the teaching, right? We could give them all this information, there's shitloads of information about how to start a podcast. So how could we give it 20 minutes? How could that 20 minutes be most effective? And in our amplifier sort of program that we run, we've even made our weekly sessions or lectures to be 20 minutes so that it forces us for the lecture to be short so that the rest of this time is more implementation and execution, and it allows us to open it up to study or to things that even we probably haven't thought about when it comes to different people's businesses. But it is all about being the teacher as opposed to the preacher, and I think that's something that concept that I learned in 2016 We Are podcast from obviously yourselves, but Sean D'Souza mentioned that in a conversation, and it's just teacher versus preacher was a concept that I just blew my mind.
Sean is brilliant. He's a great speaker.
Yeah, action, the difference between having and wanting, as you can see not in the current frame that we have here, but that you've seen through the other frame that we have had. I have this canvas print behind me. I mean, you've got to get out there and take action. Here it is. And if you want to be successful in something, find the people who have the success you want and just do what they tell you. Just do that consistently and you'll be off to a huge win. Omar, there's TikTok, there's Instagram, there's YouTube. You mentioned, where are you hanging out on the socials these days? Where's the best spot for people to connect with you?
Twitter. So I'm a Twitter fan. So I go and hang out there. You can find me at the Omar Zenhom on Twitter. And I'm actually streaming this on Twitter right now.
Wow.
Amazing.
Thank you.
So good. Omar, thanks so much for coming on the show. Go and check out the $100 MBA show. Go and check out Webinar Ninja and leave Omar a 5-star rating. He reads them personally just to say thank you for sharing all the valuable takeaways that he shared with us today. We'll be back in 48 hours' time for the next episode of Podcasting for Business. If you'd like a copy of the 10 biggest mistakes that you're making with your podcast and how to fix them, go to mistakes.wearepodcast.com or comment mistakes and the team will send that out to you. Ronsley, Omar, an absolute pleasure. Great to see you both. And we'll see you next time on Podcasting for Business.
See you, team.